90 grams of carbohydrate, 120. We're seeing some pro riders pushing 150. I spoke to Alex Wiles, the gravel rider, and he was talking about lads pushing 190 plus at Unbound only a few weeks ago. It's gone high octane, the carbohydrate intake. My rogue science understanding of this is the limiting factor isn't going to be the carbohydrate or the glycogen we're getting into our muscles, but our ability to absorb and transport that glucose and fructose without the stress. How do we think about this carbohydrate consumption in the context of amateurs just mimicking what pros are doing? They're all looking and saying, hey, they're doing 120 grams an hour. I should be doing 120 grams an hour. It's fine taking 120 grams an hour, but do we have an ability to use 120 grams per hour?
Yeah, I think it's like, I mean, geez, it's topical. I'd love to do a quick count on how many articles are published, like blog posts to put out on, you know, on fueling, intra-workout fueling every week. Pretty high. I think there's, I mean, geez, like, how long have we got?
Unlimited.
So I think there's a few factors. Like when you look at like simple maths to get going, right? Difference between the lads who are doing Unbound for
10 hours for
10 hours, for winning time at average powers of,
like, they're high for me. They'd be a high zone 3 from, probably high zone 3 for them because they're lighter as well. I'd say 300 watts nearly.
Okay, so like total energy output, massive, right? Guys in the pro peloton, Milan San Remo, 6 hours, you know, whatever it is, stage of the tour that are coming up, 200 Ks, pretty high power output. Depends on what job you're doing in the peloton, obviously, but, you know, pretty high power output, massive energy output. Yeah. You and me out on a Sunday ride, even if we're doing 4 hours, say, longer one, 3-4 hours, like good power output, you know, good energy output for us. But the gap is going to be,
watts.
The gap's going to be enormous in total energy cost, right? So I always think, like, just start at that point, like the difference in the need from, you know, a lot of the amateurs, just pure from an energy perspective, to the you know, the riders who are doing these massive days on the bike. There's your first point of difference, right?
I've never even heard it explained like that before, because for me I'd heard these generic recommendations like 60, 70, 80, 90, whatever. So someone would say, oh, if you're doing an endurance ride, it's 60 grams per hour. But I never thought about it as a function of my ability or my function of my threshold power. Like if I've you know, we work with clients who have, you know, quite low threshold powers in some cases. Some might have 220 watts. Or if you take Sarah, who's training for Badlands this year, like Sarah will do 270 watts for 20 minutes. Like, it's, you know, it's good for her and she's progressing, but in the scheme of things, if you're mimicking what a World Tour rider's doing, they'll ride that power for 15 hours if they have to.
Yeah. And so, like, I suppose where I'm going with it, like, that's just like fundamental difference, part one. So then you look at, like, well, what goes into that for the higher output guys, the World Tours, the Badlands, your 20, 25, 28, maybe 30 hours a week of training. And that's also matched with, you know, 8 to 12 grams per kilo, probably every day of carb, or call it 5 to 10, easier numbers, right? Of carb intake. So that whole process just begins to, like, increase your body's ability to eat, digest, absorb, and burn carbs, because that's, like, all they're doing.
So there's a gut efficiency level almost. Like, the gut is a muscle we can train to get more productive at processing carbohydrates?
Yeah, more than likely that seems like it. And there's a few, like, there are a few different components to it. So you can think about it from, like, an acute, as in 4 weeks leading up to a race, start to add more carbs into your on-bike fueling, with the idea is that you reduce any risk of symptoms and the ability to uptake it are not the same. So
what are we talking about? Symptom? We talk nauseous,
like cramps? Feeling heavy, bloated. You know, unless you have to make an emergency stop, you know, find a toilet somewhere, anything like that. Anything where you're starting to take in carbs, drinks, gels, chews, whatever it is, and you just get that real uncomfortable, like a little bit of cramping or just bloatingness or anything like that.
But that doesn't mean we're not processing the carbohydrates.
So the opposite way around, just because you don't get that doesn't mean that you're absorbing it.
Okay.
If that makes sense. But equally, it also works the other way around. You could still get loads of symptoms, but actually be processing it fine.
Okay.
Both require a tweaking of how you fuel, but they can mean different things, if that makes sense.
Okay, interesting. So point one on this that you were saying was looking at total workload. What other lens do you look at that through?
Yeah, exactly. So total workload is obviously very, very different. Then you get the associated day-to-day diet that goes with it and the amount of food and carbs that come in and go out every day. That compounds, and also like the lining of your gut. So you're talking about it being like a muscle that you can train.
Yeah.
The lining of your gut turns over significantly more often at a higher rate of turnover of the actual cells than your muscles do. So like the lining of your gut will completely replace itself every 5 days. So the internal lining, completely renews itself. So, it's very adaptable and very malleable. And so you can, and that's why I say there's a couple of components to it. It's that long-term associated diet that facilitates 20 hours, 30 hours a week of training. But there's also, in the build up to races or when pros go on training camps, altitude camps before the tour, as they'll be probably coming down from in the next few days, or, coming down from ready for the tour this year, that in those 2 weeks altitude, on bike fueling will go up. They'll start to use the products that are specific to that team. So, whatever the team sponsor is, whatever they're going to use in the tour. So you just start layering on specificity, and it's all those factors that contribute to that like higher total capacity. So to kind of answer your question, the first question, that's really like, it's a compounding effect of a lot of different systems that make that difference in why, the pros could potentially have above 120 grams an hour. And those, us more mortal bike riders maybe should probably sit a little bit lower than that.
How do you start thinking about, as an amateur rider, what's your framework for landing on your ideal carb intake? Is it trial and error?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So at the moment, I say that it's probably a little bit of trial and error, unfortunately. For more amateur riders, like if you're... General rule of thumb, like I'd have your sort of midpoint at kind of 60 grams an hour, 1 gram a minute. Yeah. Easiest way to think about it, right?
Regardless of intensity.
Let's just for simplicity, let's go with regardless of intensity. So, and then if you're going to go for a longer ride, so if you're going over, pick your number, if you're going over 2 hours, but whatever you feel like a long ride, because if you're new to cycling, 90 minutes might feel like a long ride, but if you're more adapted to it, 3 hours might be a long ride. So if you're going over 3 hours, then, maybe look to increase it a little bit, but see how you feel. If you want to go up to 90, you can, and that's where you look at those glucose and fructose. Maybe that's a different conversation as well. But if you're doing less than 60 minutes, or you're doing kind of somewhere between 60 and 75 minutes, depends on what you want to get out of that session. If you're just going out for a ride and you're going to go to a coffee shop, you probably just take some water with you. You'll be fine. If you're going to go and do some hills, or maybe you've got some tempo work, whatever it is, then maybe put, 30, 40, maybe 50, maybe even 60 grams of carbs, or take 50, 60 grams of carbs with you.
Well, how are we defining success and failure on this though? Because you're saying that like gastric pain, nausea, these symptoms aren't necessarily an indication that I'm not processing the carbohydrates. Yeah. So how am I defining what success is at 90 grams of carbs an hour?
Yeah. So it's a really good question. So, I mean, I would first of all make sure that you can ingest it, or whichever the amount is that you kind of want to use.
It's staying down. Yeah.
So ingest it comfortably, in forms that are familiar and easy for you, to process and ingest. That's probably the kind of primary outcomes. When you start looking at it slightly longer term, so actually when you aggregate how that session felt, did you come off that session and go, do you know what? I actually felt I felt pretty good there. Or once you've aggregated a couple of weeks of training and you started to fuel better during your training, it's the thing we see most often with the feedback that we get from how we recommend fueling with Hexus is people go, geez, I don't know. They like, it's so funny. They say it out loud. They go, something's changed, but I just can't put my finger on what it is. You're like, well, maybe you're fueling a little bit better, fueling your workouts a little bit better.
And it's an interesting observation because I spoke to Derek Friel, the Training Peaks founder, the other day, and I was asking him, what's the difference between the top 1% of users on the platform, like the highest achievers, from Primoz Roglic's Training Peaks account all the way down to your Weekend Warrior training account. And he said the feedback they put in for themselves after each session, the ability to use the notes section so they can look back then and trace patterns, and they can say, hey, I'm on a period of really good form. Instead of going, I'm on a period of really good form and I have no idea why I landed there. Now I can look back at all the comments and say, actually, I changed my fueling. Yeah. That's why I'm on a period of really good form, because I can see it traced in these comments because I've documented my fueling strategy across the Training Peaks. And obviously with you guys, you can historically look back at your fueling as well. This episode today has been supported by BIKMO Cycle Insurance. Insure your ride with BIKMO today and they'll donate £10 to Trash-Free Trails to support their work in protecting our planet. Head to BIKMO, BIKMO.com, and use the code ROADMAN to get covered and support our wild spaces. Terms apply.